Against the Tides. Episode 1, The Arrival. The chandeliers above sparkled with deliberate excess. Every corner of the Sullivan Estate ballroom gleamed with wealth, status, and curated perfection. But Noah Grant felt like he was suffocating. Standing by the edge of the room with a half-full glass of wine, he watched donors, socialites, and board members move like chess pieces under golden light. Everything was polished, every smile fake, every compliment rehearsed. He exhaled slowly, pulling at his collar. "Back at your favorite corner," came a familiar voice. Elena Brooks appeared beside him, sleek in her emerald gown, her dark curls pulled into a clean bun. Noah offered a tired smile. "You ever notice how these galas feel like reruns? Same faces, same handshakes, same fake laughter." Elena arched a brow. "That's rich, coming from the Prince of Lennox City's golden family." He chuckled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Sometimes I wonder what it'd be like to start over. No name, no legacy, just something real." Before Elena could answer, a sharp voice cut in. "Noah?" They turned as Monica Sullivan approached, her posture regal, her expression steely. "You're needed at the front. The benefactors are asking for you. And perhaps limit the brooding. This is a fundraiser, not a funeral." Without waiting for a reply, she turned and swept away. Elena shook her head. "And she wonders why you keep one foot out the door." Noah drained his glass. "One day I'm going to disappear, and no one will even notice." The next morning, Noah found himself at the university cafe, half hiding behind a newspaper as he waited for a meeting with one of the school's tech fellows. He preferred places like this, unpretentious, noisy, and indifferent to who he was. For a moment, he almost blended in, until she walked in. She wasn't particularly loud, but something about her presence struck him. Confident, yet unsure, like someone in a new world but refusing to be overwhelmed by it. She had deep brown skin, a tightly braided bun, and a calmness that stood out in a room full of frantic students. He didn't know her name, but something about her made him sit up straighter. Moments later, as fate would have it, they collided. Amara Okoye had been in Lennox City less than 24 hours, and already she felt like she was walking through a dream, and not necessarily the good kind. Between the flight exhaustion, campus orientation, and financial paperwork, she hadn't even unpacked. But Tayo, her ever-spirited best friend, had insisted on coffee before she collapsed. "You'll adjust," Tayo said between sips. "You're in one of the best architecture programs in the country. You'll crush it. And if you're lucky, you might even meet someone tall, rich, and emotionally available." "I came here to build skyscrapers, not chase men." "Right, but you won't mind if you bump into one, will you?" And then she did. Literally. Turning toward the cafe counter, Amara smacked right into someone. Firm, tall, warm. "Whoa," the stranger said, steadying her by the arm. "Sorry, I wasn't looking." "Neither was I," Amara said, flustered. "My fault." He looked at her, eyes narrowing slightly in curiosity. "You're new here, aren't you? That obvious?" "There's something about your accent," he said, smiling slightly, "and the way you're gripping your coffee like it's your survival kit." She laughed despite herself. "You're not wrong." Something passed between them, brief, electric, unfinished. Across the room, Tayo sat frozen, watching the encounter unfold. She leaned back in her chair and whispered under her breath, "Well, well, Lennox City, you sneaky little thing." That evening, Monica Sullivan stood in her study, swirling a glass of Bordeaux in her hand. The fire behind her crackled softly, but her tone was sharp when she spoke into the phone. "I want a full background check. The African girl Noah was speaking to today on campus," she said coolly. "I want to know where she lives, what she wants, and how soon she can be removed." Somewhere on the other side of the city, Noah drove in silence, city lights reflecting off his windshield. His mind wasn't on business or his next deal. It was on her, the girl with the calm eyes and nervous laugh. She was different, he murmured, like she hadn't learned how fake people can be here. He didn't know her name, but something told him he would. Noah couldn't shake the girl from the cafe. Even during his meeting with the university's tech director, he found himself distracted. Her laugh, the softness of her, the way her eyes held an unfamiliar kind of honesty. There was something about her that felt untouched by this city, like she hadn't been trained to perform or pretend. Later that evening, he pulled out his phone and scrolled through his calendar, ignoring the dozens of messages piling up from his mother and business associates. But it wasn't a meeting or investor he was looking for. He was trying to remember if he'd asked her name. He hadn't, and that bothered him more than it should have. Amara, meanwhile, was too busy surviving her first full day in Lennox City to think about mystery men. Orientation had been overwhelming. Buildings too tall, accents too fast, her phone refusing to connect to the university Wi-Fi. She hadn't even unpacked the few belongings she'd brought with her. But every time her mind began to settle, she saw his face again. The way he looked at her. Like he saw her before she said a word. "Snap out of it," she muttered to herself as she folded a few clothes. "You didn't come here to fall." But her words rang hollow. 2 neighborhoods away, Monica Sullivan sat with a single file spread across her mahogany desk. Her assistant had done well. The information came quickly. Amara Okoye, 24, graduate student from Nigeria. Background, modest family, high achieving, no previous record. A scholarship recipient with no known political ties or social ambitions. In Monica's world, that kind of profile was dangerous. People with no attachment could become anything. She picked up her phone and made the call. "Desmond Okoye," she said as the line connected. "Yes, that's right. Your cousin. She just arrived in Lennox City, didn't she?" There was a pause. "I think you and I should have a little chat." Amara and Teo were walking through the student center the next day when it happened. They'd just finished picking up course materials when a voice called out, hesitant and unfamiliar. "Amara!" She turned, surprised to see a man approaching. Mid-30s, sharply dressed, with a hesitant smile. It took her a moment, but recognition clicked. "Desmond?" she asked. "What are you doing here?" "I moved here last year, working with an investment firm downtown. Small world, huh?" Teo gave him a slow, suspicious once-over. "You never told me you had family here," Amara said. "I didn't think he lived here anymore. Amara admitted. Last I heard, he was still in Abuja. Desmond smiled, but his eyes darted, calculating. Listen, I know you just got here, but be careful, he said, lowering his voice. Lennox City isn't as welcoming as it seems. Some people smile with knives behind their backs. Before she could ask what he meant, he patted her shoulder and walked away. That night, Noah sat in his car again, parked outside the university library. He wasn't stalking, at least he told himself he wasn't. He just wanted to see her again. He didn't even know why. Maybe it was because when she looked at him, she didn't see a Sullivan. She didn't see money or status or scandal. She just saw a guy with messy hair and tired eyes. And for once, he didn't feel like pretending to be anything else. Across the city, Grace Thompson stood in front of Monica's desk. "She's not going to last," Grace said coldly. "Girls like her never do." Monica tilted her glass. "I don't intend to wait and find out." Meanwhile, Amara tossed in her bed, Desmond's words still echoing in her ears. Some people smile with knives behind their backs. She wasn't sure who the warning was about, but in Lennox City, she was starting to understand. Kindness often came at a cost.
Episode 3. Something About Her. Noah hadn't planned to run into her again. He told himself it was coincidence, stopping by the university library to check on a foundation-sponsored program. But somewhere deep down, he knew better. The truth was, Amara had carved a space in his thoughts, and no amount of logic or legacy could scrub her out. He spotted her before she noticed him, curled up in the corner of the second floor, laptop open, fingers flying over the keyboard. Her face was intense, focused. Her braids were tied up in a loose bun, a few strands falling across her cheek. She was beautiful in a way Lennox City rarely allowed women to be, unfiltered, unguarded, unaware. He hesitated for a moment before walking over. "Hope this seat isn't taken?" he asked, his voice warm. Amara looked up, startled. Her surprise melted into cautious amusement. "You again?" she asked. "I told you I'd run into you," he said with a smile. "This city is smaller than it pretends." They ended up talking for over an hour. Amara told him about Abuja, about growing up sketching buildings in the dirt when she couldn't afford notebooks. She spoke of her dream to design cityscapes that blended culture and innovation. He listened, genuinely, quietly, more curious than he'd been in months. Noah didn't speak much about himself, but Amara noticed the weight behind his silences. There was something restrained about him, like he'd spend his life being watched. "Do you always hide behind charm and vague answers?" she teased. He smirked. "Only when I meet women who look like they can read straight through me." Amara laughed. "Maybe I can." Outside, the rain had started. Noah offered to drive her back to the dorms, and though Amara hesitated, something in his eyes told her it was okay, safe. They walked through the mist to his sleek black car. She raised an eyebrow. "Nice ride." "I wish I could say it's borrowed," he replied, dryly. "But unfortunately, it screams who I am." Amara slid into the passenger seat, surprised by the scent of leather and sandalwood. She glanced at the dashboard, everything digital, cold, precise, just like the world he'd come from. As he drove, they listened to soft jazz on low volume, the city lights gliding by like whispers. He dropped her off outside the dorm's gates, but neither moved to get out. "So," Noah said, "are you always this composed?" Amara tilted her head. "Only when I meet men who ask too many questions without answering any of their own." He smirked. "Fair enough. Ask me one." "Okay," she said. "Why did you come to the cafe that day, really?" Noah paused. "Because I was tired of pretending, and then you walked in, looking like someone who still believed the world could be beautiful." Silence hung in the car like breath on glass. Amara's heart beat faster, but she masked it with a soft laugh. "You're good with words. I don't want to be. Not with you." Back in her room, Amara sat on her bed staring at the ceiling. Tayo was already asleep, headphones in, mumbling in her dreams. But Amara couldn't close her eyes. She didn't know what to make of Noah. He was nothing like she expected. Polished, yes, but real beneath it. Tired, like he was searching for something and didn't know how to name it. And maybe, just maybe, she felt the same. Back in his apartment, Noah poured a glass of scotch, but didn't touch it. He sat by the window watching the rain blur the city skyline. And for the first time in a very long while, the emptiness didn't feel so permanent.
The text came in just after noon. "Would you be free for coffee later? There's a quiet place I want to show you. Noah." Amara read it 3 times before locking her phone. She should say no. Not because she didn't want to see him. She did, more than she cared to admit. But because everything about him felt uncertain. Noah belonged to a world she had only observed from the outside, a world that smelled like wealth and moved with careful whispers. And she didn't trust a world that quiet. She walked through campus, her hands tucked in her jacket pockets, the cool breeze doing little to ease the buzz of indecision in her chest. "Noah seems harmless," Tayo had said when she mentioned him. "But still, girl, be smart." Amara was always smart. That was why her heart and her instincts were now in conflict. Back in his office, Noah stared at his phone for a few more minutes after sending the text. He didn't want to rush her. In fact, he was surprised he cared this much about what she thought. He could have asked any woman in the city out and had a yes before the question was fully formed. But Amara wasn't like the women who drifted through fundraisers and gallery openings. She challenged him without trying. She made him slow down. It wasn't until 2 hours later that his phone buzzed again. "I can meet, but I have class until 4, Amara." That was all. No emoji, no smile. Just enough to make his lips curl into a grin. By 4:30, Noah was waiting just outside the west gates of the university, parked in a black SUV that looked like it cost more than a year of Amara's scholarship. She hesitated as she approached, adjusting the strap on her tote bag. He got out of the car and opened the door for her, casual but attentive. "You're late," she said, more to fill the air than out of annoyance. "You're worth waiting for," he replied. She rolled her eyes but smiled, just barely. He drove through parts of the city she hadn't seen before, quiet, tree-lined streets far from the chaotic pulse of downtown Lenox. Finally, they pulled up to a small cafe nuzzled between a second-hand bookstore and a flower shop. It didn't look like a place someone like Noah would frequent, which made her more curious. Inside, it was warm. Wooden floors, mismatched chairs, bookshelves in the corners. The kind of place that felt like it remembered its visitors. "This was my hideout during college," Noah said, as they settled into a corner table. "When I needed to feel real." Amara gave him a look. You don't feel real most days? He shrugged. Not in the way that matters. They ordered drinks. Hers a caramel latte, his just black coffee. And as the steam rose between them, so did the questions. This time, Amara asked first, "Why did you really want to see me again?" Noah looked at her for a long moment before answering. "Because when I'm around you, I don't feel like I have to lie." That was a bold thing to say. Too bold, maybe. But it wasn't a line. She could tell by the way his voice dipped at the end. He meant it. Still, something in her pulled back. "You don't even know me," she said quietly. "I'd like to," he replied. She looked out the window, watching an elderly couple walk hand in hand past the flower shop. Her heart tightened. "You seem good," she said, then added, "but that scares me." "Why?" "Because nothing good ever lasts when you grow up to expect the opposite." Noah's voice dropped. "I know that feeling." For a moment they sat in silence. But this time it wasn't awkward. It was the kind of quiet that builds something invisible between two people. A thread, a wire, a beginning. Amara met his eyes again. "One coffee doesn't make us friends." "I'm not trying to be your friend," Noah said gently. She laughed softly. "That's what scares me too." As they left the cafe, the wind had picked up. Noah walked her back to the car, careful not to touch her unless invited. He opened the door again, and she paused before stepping in. He noticed the hesitation. "I won't ever ask for more than you're ready to give, but I'll be here when you are." She nodded once, then got in. As he pulled away from the curb, Noah didn't reach for her hand, but Amara found herself wishing he had. Episode 5. Unspoken Truths. The dinner wasn't planned. Noah hadn't expected to crave her presence again so soon, but something about the way Amara looked at him during their coffee lingered like smoke in his lungs. It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no either. He messaged her late that night. "Dinner tomorrow? Somewhere quiet, just us." She didn't reply until dawn. "Okay, but I picked the place." That simple message tugged a smile from him. She chose a tucked-away Moroccan restaurant in Lenox City's Arts District, walls painted with deep red hues, copper lanterns throwing dancing shadows across mosaic tables. Noah arrived early, expecting nothing in particular, but when Amara walked in, time slowed. She wore a simple indigo silk dress that clung just enough to suggest and not announce. Her skin, deep and radiant like burnished bronze kissed by moonlight, seemed to glow beneath the warm lights. Her natural curls were swept into an elegant updo with a few tendrils teasing her temples. No makeup, no fuss, just the power of a woman who knew herself, and gold hoop earrings that shimmered with each step like little suns orbiting her jawline. Noah stood before he realized he had. His breath caught. She wasn't just beautiful, she was otherworldly. Something sculpted by the gods in a quiet moment of perfection, the kind of beauty that didn't shout, but hummed, low, soulful, undeniable. "You look," he began, voice a little hoarse. Amara arched her brow. "Don't start," she said playfully. "Let me eat before I melt from flattery." She sat across from him, effortlessly composed. Noah blinked, trying to ground himself. Everything around her blurred, the lanterns, the low music, the whisper of the city beyond. She became the focal point of the evening, like a dream cupped in his hands he didn't know how to hold. "So," he said, his voice finally steadying, "you like leading?" "I like choosing. There's a difference." They ordered tagine and saffron rice, dipping warm bread into spiced sauces, while conversation wandered. Amara talked about her old dreams, how she once sketched designs for a girls' school in Lagos, how corruption and red tape tore holes in her ambition. "And now?" Noah asked gently. She shrugged. "I still want it, but I don't know if it's worth holding on to dreams that always float just out of reach." Noah leaned forward. "Then maybe you need someone who believes dreams are still worth chasing, even the distant ones." Her eyes softened, lips parting slightly as if to speak, but she hesitated. There was something about him. His presence didn't demand, it invited, and she found herself teetering on the edge of wanting to step in. She reached for her water, and her hand trembled just slightly. The glass tipped, but Noah caught it with a quick, instinctive movement. Their hands touched, and for a brief, electric second, Amara was no longer thinking about dreams or past heartbreaks or the fear of trusting someone again. She was just feeling. "Why are you really interested in me?" she asked suddenly, her voice lower, almost vulnerable. Noah exhaled slowly. "Because I've seen loneliness in the middle of crowded rooms, and when I look at you, I see someone who hides it just like I do. But I also see strength and fire, and I haven't stopped thinking about you since the day we met." Her defenses, long forged from pain and disappointment, began to melt. But before she could respond, a voice called out from the entrance. "Amara?" She turned. It was her cousin. He wasn't there pleased seeing her already getting cozy with some strange man. Instantly, her heart aches. She remembered vividly his words on the first meeting. She pulled her hands instinctively. Noah did nothing but leaned back on his chair with his heart tightened, but showed no expression outwardly. Then she said, "Noah, I should probably get going. Talk to you later." Noah nodded and said, "If you don't mind, I will drop you off." But she insisted on catching a cab. He has no choice but to let her be, as trying to push may just scare her further. Episode 6. Shadows of Doubt. The night had wrapped the city in a velvet hush, but Noah's mind buzzed like a restless melody. From his apartment window, he watched the city lights flicker below, but none of it held his attention. All he could see was her, Amara. She had shown up earlier that day, just like she said she might, though even in her message there had been hesitation, like her heart hadn't yet given permission for her feet to follow through. But she came, and when she did, Noah had forgotten how to breathe. She stepped into the little cafe by the bay, wearing the soft blush-pink blouse that kissed her rich caramel-brown skin. Her hair, thick, black, and radiant, was swept into a natural twist-out puff, the strands coiled like the waves of her home country, shining under the cafe lights like polished obsidian. She didn't walk in, she arrived, with the poise of a woman who had spent years holding herself together, and the eyes of someone not easily impressed or easily moved. Noah had never seen beauty like that. Not just physical, presence. A quiet storm wrapped in grace. "Amara," he whispered, more breath than voice. She smiled faintly, unsure, and sat across from him at the small round table, but even as she smiled, her fingers played with the corner of the napkin, her body half turned toward the door, ready to run if she needed to. "I don't know what I'm doing here," she said softly, her accent laced with the lilt of Abuja's formal warmth. "I should be in my studio finishing a model." He smiled. "But you're here, and I'm still wondering if it's a mistake." They talked, or rather he talked, filling the silence with questions and easy words. She responded with cautious glances, guarded smiles, and half-answers that said just enough but not too much. He learned that she loved old buildings with character, ruins that refused to be forgotten. that she'd left Abuja after winning a national design competition and receiving a full scholarship to study abroad. That architecture wasn't just what she did, it was who she was. "I don't build for today," she said, stirring a drink she never drank. "I build for memory, for meaning, for people like me who need a space to feel seen." Her voice trembled at the edges of that last word. He didn't press. And then, as quickly as she had come, she stood. "I should go." Noah didn't try to stop her. She was like a bird freshly escaped a cage, but beautiful to behold, but terrified of every open sky. Later that evening, Amara sat in her tiny apartment bedroom, legs curled under her, staring at her phone. Noah's message blinked softly on the screen. "I hope I didn't scare you, but even if I did, I'm still glad you came." She read it, and read it again. He hadn't asked her to explain. He hadn't tried to convince her. Just thanked her. That sincerity shook something loose in her, something she'd kept locked tight since the day she left Abuja behind. Not just the city, but the shame of loving someone who had made her feel small. Love had once clipped her wings. She wasn't sure she wanted to fly again, especially not towards someone who felt like sky. A knock on her door startled her. She opened it to find Tayo, her flatmate, and one of the few people she trusted in this new life. "Were you out with that art guy?" Tayo asked, stepping in with that grin that always came before a lecture. "Your cheeks are glowing like you drank sunshine." "His name is Noah, and it was just coffee," Amara muttered shyly. Tayo raised an eyebrow. "Your version of just coffee made you stare at the ceiling like you're trying to calculate the square root of your feelings." Amara sighed. "I don't know what to do with him. He's kind, gentle, like he sees too much." Tayo sat beside her and bumped her shoulder playfully. "Maybe you're not scared of him. Maybe you're scared of what he makes you feel." Amara didn't answer. Her silence said enough. Across town, Noah sat with his guitar resting on his lap, strumming aimless notes. The tune that emerged wasn't from any song he knew. It was raw, delicate, like the beginning of something unfinished. He had no idea where this road with Amara would lead, but he knew this much. She had already changed the way he heard silence.
Episode 7. Ghosts of Glass Walls. The golden light of morning streamed through the sheer curtains of Amara's small apartment, painting quiet lines across her sketch pad. She sat at her drafting table, elbow propped under her chin, unmoving. The paper beneath her was blank, her charcoal pencil untouched. But her mind was far from empty. It was crowded with memories she thought she had left behind. Noah's message from the night before still sat on her phone. "I hope I didn't scare you, but even if I did, I'm still glad you came." Sweet, thoughtful, gentle, and dangerous. Because it stirred something in her she'd spent nearly 2 years trying to bury. A girl who once believed in promises, in devotion, in a kind of love that looked and felt like forever. A girl who once loved Maynard. 2 years ago. It had begun like every great romance should, unexpectedly, beautifully. They met at a local art showcase in Asokoro. He was a creative consultant, smooth-talking and stylish, with a laugh that made even silence blush. She was still in university then, just finishing her final year, with dreams that spilled over like ink, eager, open, and endless. Maynard had walked up to her while she stood admiring a wood and glass sculpture and said, "You look like someone who sees more than what's in front of her." And she had smiled. Just like that, they clicked. Every night turned into conversations that lasted until dawn. Architecture, books, travel, childhood traumas.
He said she was brilliant, soft, but strong, and that he wanted to build a life with someone like her, someone who didn't need saving, but made the world feel safer. With him, she laughed more. She sketched buildings with names like us and home. She stopped doubting herself. She believed. He had always bought her little but thoughtful gifts, took her to concerts, called her his future. He told her he was done playing games, that she was different. But slowly, things began to shift. The calls became shorter, the visits less frequent, the excuses more polished. He said he was just busy, said she was too intense, said she needed to let things flow. She let them flow, right into heartbreak. The night she found out about the other woman, Amara had stood in front of Maynard, her voice shaking, but her eyes dry. She confronted him with quiet dignity, expecting maybe guilt, regret, or even denial. But instead, he laughed softly and said, "You were the idea of love I wanted, but not the reality I could handle." And just like that, he broke her. Not with cruelty, but with careless truth. Amara snapped back to the present with a bitter taste in her mouth. Her fingers clenched around the charcoal pencil until it snapped in two. She had given Maynard everything: her trust, her imagination, her future plans, and he had reduced her to a lesson he learned and left behind. Since then, love had felt like a risky blueprint, always promising a structure, always collapsing in the end. An alert buzzed on her tablet. Final project deadline moved up 2 weeks earlier. Panic twisted in her stomach. That gave her barely enough time to finalize her concept, complete the digital models, and prepare for a pitch that could determine the future of her scholarship. There was no room for distractions, especially at not kind-eyed strangers who made her want to hope again. Meanwhile, across campus, Noah was in the art studio working on a mural, but his brushstrokes lacked their usual rhythm. He kept thinking about Amara, about how she had smiled like she didn't mean it, how her laughter felt rehearsed, how her eyes seemed to say, "I've been here before, and it ended badly." He didn't know her past, but he could feel the weight of it. And still, he wanted in. Not to fix her, but to understand the broken pieces, and maybe help her see the beauty in them again. Later that night, Amara sat in the living room with Tayo. She didn't try to hide behind half-truths this time. "There was someone," she said. Tayo set down her tea, quiet. "His name was Maynard. He made me feel seen, until he didn't. He made me believe in something that didn't exist. And when it all fell apart, he made me believe it was my fault, that I was too much, too serious, too passionate." Tayo's eyes softened. "And now?" Amara gave a small, tired laugh. "Now I flinch when someone sees me too clearly." There was a long silence between them. Then Tayo said, "Maybe Noah isn't like him. Maybe he's not looking for someone easy. Maybe he's looking for someone real." That night, after a long pause, Amara finally picked up her phone. She typed slowly, "Thank you, Noah, for being patient. I don't know what this is or where it goes, but maybe we can find out together." A few minutes passed, then his reply lit up her screen. "No pressure, no timeline. Just you as you are. That's all I want." And for the first time in 2 years, Amara didn't feel like a broken draft waiting for approval. She felt like a story still unfolding. Episode 8. Cracks in the Foundation. The studio was quiet, almost too quiet. save for the faint hum of the air conditioner and the persistent scratch of Amara's pencil against tracing paper. Her fingers moved faster than her mind could process, lines stacking over lines in what looked like order but felt like chaos. It was past midnight. The floor around her desk was littered with crumpled drafts, bent rulers, coffee-stained notes, and heartbreak-shaped frustration. Her model wasn't coming together, not the way she saw it in her head. Her presentation was due in less than 2 weeks, and all she had were fragments. One second, she was erasing lines. The next, she was blinking back tears. She pushed her chair back, stood, and paced. Her hands trembled. Her throat felt tight. There was something about failing that terrified her, not because of grades or professors, but because she had come too far to break now. She couldn't go back to Abuja with nothing but regrets. She wasn't even sure how he got in, but suddenly, Noah was there, at the doorway of the studio, a satchel slung over his shoulder, his face drawn with concern. "I brought you this," he said quietly, holding up a bag with 2 takeaway cups. "I figured artists need fuel." Amara turned, startled. Her eyes were red. "I didn't text you," she said, voice cracking despite her best effort to stay composed. "I know," he said, "but you said you were working late, and I figured if I were alone in a room full of blank paper and pressure, I'd want someone to show up anyway." She opened her mouth, then closed it. Noah stepped closer and placed the coffee on her desk, carefully moving aside her scattered sketches, treating them like something precious instead of a mess. He picked up one of her drafts, a rough elevation sketch of a building with soft curves and open spaces, and looked at it with genuine admiration. "This," he said softly, "looks like a place someone could breathe in." Amara let out a broken laugh. "It's a disaster. Everything in my head feels like glass shattering in slow motion." Noah didn't try to fix it. He didn't offer pep talks or solutions. He just sat down on the floor beside her drafting chair and looked up at her with the kind of patience that made her want to cry harder. "You don't have to carry it alone," he said. "Even if you don't say anything, I'll still be here. Not because I expect something, but because I care." She stared at him, into him, for a long second. His eyes didn't waver. And then, like water finally spilling over the rim, Amara let herself break just a little. She slumped down beside him, their backs to the wall, the studio dim around them. Her head leaned into his shoulder, not fully, just enough to feel that someone was there. Solid, still, safe. "I'm scared," she whispered. "I know," he replied. "I don't want to disappoint everyone, or myself. You won't." A silence settled between them, gentle and heavy. Noah reached into his satchel and pulled out a tiny folded paper crane. He placed it gently in her palm. "What's this?" she asked. "Hope," he said with a shy grin. "Something small, but still standing." She chuckled quietly, the sound softer than before. And for the first time in days, the knot in her chest loosened, not because her problems had disappeared, but because she wasn't alone with them anymore. Later, as they sat in the stillness, surrounded by models and mess, Amara said something she didn't expect. "Noah, you make me feel like I don't have to keep proving I belong here." He turned to her. "You already do. The world just hasn't caught up yet." Episode 9. The Quiet Ways We Love. The days that followed blurred into long hours and longer nights for Amara. Her final presentation loomed like a giant shadow over her life. Between digital rendering, model construction, and sleepless critiques from professors, she barely had time to eat, let alone breathe. But somehow, in the chaos, Noah remained a steady hum, in the background of her world. She didn't always see him. Sometimes entire days passed without his voice or his face, but his presence lingered in gestures, in notes, in unexpected moments that stitched comfort into the fabric of her exhaustion. One morning, she opened her email and found a subject line that made her pause. "For your final touches, from a fellow artist who believes in you." Attached was a file of hand-drawn texture references and light shadow studies Noah had compiled, techniques she had once mentioned struggling with during a late-night conversation he hadn't even seemed to be paying attention to. There was no long message, just a simple, "Thought these might help your visual concept. I'll be around if you want to bounce ideas." Amara sat back in her chair, eyes stinging, not from fatigue, but from being understood. Another evening, she stumbled back to her apartment after a brutal 5-hour work session in the lab, only to find a brown paper bag on her doorstep. The warm aroma made her pause. Inside was a container of peppered jollof rice and suya spiced chicken with a side of plantain, still steaming, still perfect. A handwritten note was taped to the box. "Your soul probably misses home more than you realize. This is the next best thing. From the Golden Bowl, best West African place in the city. Enjoy Architect Day." She smiled at the nickname. He wasn't just paying attention. He was listening to the things she never said out loud. They didn't talk every night, but on the days when he had time, between his own mural projects, freelance deadlines, and evening shifts at the art gallery, Noah would stop by the studio. Sometimes he helped with lighting angles. Sometimes he just sat nearby, sketching quietly, his presence more reassuring than words. One evening, he caught him staring at her design. "Don't," she said, her voice laced with weariness. "It's still a mess." "It's bold," he said, "just like you." Amara turned to him. "You make it sound like I'm fearless." "No," he said, eyes soft. "I just think fear looks different on people who keep going anyway." Tayo had noticed the change. "You smile more now," Tayo told Amara one night while they brushed their teeth side by side. Amara rinsed and muttered, "I don't smile, I smirk." "Please," Tayo scoffed, elbowing her. "You float around the studio like someone sneaking glances at the sky. You're practically glowing." Amara rolled her eyes, but didn't argue. Because it was true. Noah hadn't asked for anything. He hadn't pushed. He just stayed. Present, thoughtful, quiet. And yet, it felt like he was everywhere. Even in her dreams, he showed up. Not as a romantic fantasy, but as a calmness she couldn't explain. One night, as she finished the final layering of her digital presentation, her hands aching and shoulders tight, her phone buzzed with a simple message. "Almost there. You've done more than survive this. You've built something only you could. Can't wait to see it." She didn't respond immediately. She just stared at the message and exhaled. The hall was cold. Not from temperature, but from the tension of gathered minds, hushed voices, and the sharp, sterile energy of final review day. A wide projector screen lit up the front of the room, displaying rotating architectural models. Students were scattered across rows, laptops open, notepads ready, hearts racing. Amara sat 3 rows from the front. Her fingers were locked tightly around her presentation pointer, her heart an erratic drumbeat in her chest. She had worn her simplest outfit, a fitted black blouse tucked into grey high-waisted pants, hair tied in a sleek puff, edges laid with practiced precision of someone trying to hold herself together. But what truly set her apart was her face. Calm on the surface, yet alight with an internal storm. Professor Halvorsen's voice echoed across the space. "Next up, Amara Okoye, Design Studio 3. Let's have you present your submission. Her legs moved before her nerves could protest. As she walked to the front, she caught a glance toward the far corner of the room and paused. Noah. He stood just behind the glass partition at the very back of the hall, leaning casually against the wall in a denim shirt and dark jeans. Hands folded, no camera, no sketch pad, just him, watching. Their eyes met briefly. He nodded, the faint smile on his face. Amara breathed in, deeply, and turned to face the sea of faculty. She began. This project is titled Haven, a center for displaced creatives, a space designed to hold not just bodies, but emotion, memory, growth. As she spoke, her voice found rhythm. Her slides displayed an open, dome-inspired building with layered terracings, green spaces, light wells, and walls that curved like an embrace. She explained her choice of materials, local, sustainable, and how light was treated like its own architectural element. Halfway through, she switched to a live walkthrough model, layers blooming to reveal intimate communal zones, creative workspaces, and quiet corners for healing. The room fell into a hush, pierced only by her voice and the quiet flick of slides changing. She was no longer shaking. She was owning it. When the last slide faded, there was a moment of silence. Then came the critique. Professor Langston, sharp-eyed and known for his brutal honesty, was the first to speak. You've got an eye for emotional structure, but where you really impressed me was in your integration of movement and memory. This wasn't just a building, it was a story. Amara swallowed. Thank you. A second professor chimed in. It feels deeply personal. Was it inspired by something? Amara hesitated, just for a breath. Then, yes, it was inspired by the need to rebuild when life erases what once felt solid. The room went quiet again, but this time it was the kind of quiet that lingered when people felt something they weren't expecting. As she stepped down from the platform, she didn't look toward the faculty. She looked toward Noah. He was no longer leaning. He stood straighter now. Clapped once, then twice. Just enough to be seen, not heard. Then he mouthed two words. You soared. Amara smiled. Not the kind that flickered. The kind that stayed. Outside, as the sun painted soft streaks across the walkway, Amara found him waiting beneath one of the elm trees. Couldn't miss it, he said. You were phenomenal. She looked at him, truly looked. You showed up. I told you I would. She reached into her bag, pulled out a small paper crane, his own, carefully unfolded and refolded, with a tiny scribbled note inside. Hope returns the favor. They stood in silence, not needing to say more. Somewhere in the distance, the leaves rustled gently, as though the world itself had leaned in to witness something rare, the quiet beginning of something